But you would serve it in a bowl like this. In there. Even with a little bit more herbs on top if you want. And this is our makeup cassoulet. Easy to do, a few minutes, great taste. And happy cooking.
All right, let this click. You ready? Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Amy, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Great. Long time to talk.
I know. What's going on? Tell us everything.
Oh, good. I mean, we are, as I'm sure you can imagine, keeping real busy out here. It is also election season, so that's taking up some time. And yeah, just never a dull moment in Aurora.
It sounds like it. So, tell us what's going on with Blackstone in particular, trying to get in your good graces.
Yeah, so that letter, I just kind of wanted to share that. That's something that we all got in our inboxes, back in March, and it's kind of standard fare. I've seen that a lot of industry who does business in the city, so like we'll get letters like that from like oil and gas operators, some other rental companies, and then invitation was one that really stood out to me because I'm aware of Blackstone and their dealings throughout the U.S. And we've noticed that the housing market here in Aurora is really really heated. I mean, it is all over the country in most major metros, but in Aurora it is bonkers.
Yeah.
Just for like quick comparison, like when I
Nope.
moved to Aurora back in like late 2015, early 2016, and we bought our townhome, it was like 216 is what we ended up closing on it for. And at that point, the median price in Aurora for a single family home was like 325.
Holy
And
shit.
this month it crested $500,000. Like that's how out of control the market is. And I think it was in the Wall Street Journal or WAPO, one of those big national publications, where what was it, like 20%, or as much as 20% of all like real estate transactions for single family homes in most major metro markets were due to real estate investment trusts and what was it they called it, permanent capital. um, so that is what, in my opinion, and I think the data backs this up, is really driving the ballooning cost of real estate in Aurora and across the country. And I wanted to see what we could do to kind of not necessarily get ahead of it because it's a little late for that, but to try to like tamp that down and restore some sanity and stability to the market.
So, how exactly do you intervene as a city council member to try to put some sort of price ceiling on the total cost of the owner's market in particular
Yeah.
when you've already received some pushback? Sounds.
No, I mean, that's part of the frustration. Like we've been trying to, do something like this since like April. And our city attorney's office, I'll give them credit. They've done a tremendous amount of research, and I can't give away all the specifics because I think it's like pseudo confidential information still. But basically, we're getting pushback on, I think I would actually argue uncharitable interpretations of the contract clause, the 14th, 4th, and 5th Amendments. So,
Did I say 13th?
you know,
Yeah, 14th. What is it? The 14th Amendments?
yeah, 14th, 4th, and 5th, if I am not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes.
So, part of the issue is, when we look at what other countries have done to kind of combat this predatory behavior, like I think I remember like in Spain, I think that it was in Madrid, or Barcelona, one of the two, where like one of their local governments basically was like, hey, landlords, you need to stop raising rents on people and driving them, to get evicted. And if you don't, we're going to seize your property and turn it into public housing.
Yep.
Like that kind of direct, aggressive approach, I love, because I believe housing should not be a commodity. It's a basic necessity for existence in a civilized society. But we can't do that kind of stuff here. So we have to get a little more creative, since our laws are structured differently. And, I looked at Hawaii. One of my good friends, who is a tenants' rights attorney and very passionate about housing justice, brought Hawaii's situation to my attention. And,
Are you
our
talking
city
about?
attorneys.
Can we say his name?
Yeah, Jason Legg.
Yeah, I've talked to him before.
Yeah, he's a really awesome tenants' rights attorney in the Denver metro area, and I'm honored to be his council member as well. But yeah, he does great work. And he brought Hawaii to my attention, since it's like the most applicable, since they still operate under the U.S. Constitution, and what they kind of did to tamp down on not just predatory behavior, but really like consolidation in their housing market. And so what we got back from, I guess the summary that I'm comfortable sharing is that just doing the direct approach would likely result in a tremendous amount of litigation, and I don't want to get us involved in that, just because, it's a ton of money spent, and then it really reduces, or frankly completely eliminates, the timeliness of what we're trying to do. So the kind of approach that was highlighted for us was gather more information to make your case as to why a strong market, intervention is necessary, because that's how Hawaii basically managed to do what they did. And a lot of the parameters that they laid out for us, I think we already have suitable information to address. The latter part, though, is like the consolidation info. That's not something that we have readily available as a city, so it's going to require partnership with the 3 counties that serve Aurora and their assessors' offices, right, to grab that information. Because you can pretty easily, just like through the county assessor's office, just like click on, we have a really great GIS system for Arapahoe County, and you can just click on different properties and see who owns it, when they were sold, and just match up, like, is the owner the same as the occupant? Is it a similar family name, or is it an LLC? And what you'll quickly find is that there's a ton of LLCs out there, oftentimes the same LLC, who own property all over the city.
Right.
And that's kind of what the kind of information we need, just to see like the true scale of it, to be able to intervene and have the grounds to defend it, basically, because that's something that I still think would inevitably be challenged, just because these, you're getting in the way of a big business, who basically makes their money by extracting wealth from working class people in our city, and they won't like that. So we need to have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed, before we move forward, basically.
Absolutely. Okay, will you excuse, I'm putting up your name right now. Make sure I'm spelling your name correctly. You are Aurora's, what's your district?
Ward 4.
Oi! Okay, got it.
Yeah, you got it.
Well, no, it keeps on like wanting to go to. Okay.
It keeps wanting to snap to the corner using OBS. Yeah.
Maybe make this not. So hard to read. That might be worse. Okay, wait, I'm gonna just go back to white, and then where's the background?
Yeah, I think that has the best contrast with the white.
There we go. Well, sorry, that took forever. Hold on, I'll be right
It's all
back.
good. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, usually I forget. You don't see me like scamper away whenever I get up.
Yeah. So
All right, so tell me more about this consolidation. Wait, is that something that you can talk about, or?
yeah, so I mean, this is all part of what I'm going to be talking about on my policy blog before long here, anyway. So we need to basically gather information from the assessor's offices for our counties, since Aurora is just a city and not a county, and basically prove that there's enough consolidation that intervention is warranted, especially in the single family market, and then try to see if we can actually whip the political support that we need for this, because I think it's going to be very difficult for folks to argue that allowing REITs and other permanent capital or organized capital to just basically create a city and society of renters is actually a benefit to anybody at all. I think that this is something that's been going on since the Great Recession, as you mentioned earlier, and that's when we really saw this like trend begin to take off. It started innocuously enough with like the HGTV, like this is how you flip a house, kind of programming.
Yeah.
And that basically, once you infuse that with permanent capital, it becomes exceptionally predatory in a hurry. And I think we've kind of just hit like a critical mass, where it's at the point where regular working people cannot afford to buy a home or start a family, let alone generate any kind of wealth from their home, which is a problematic practice as is. But business as usual, basically, that door is closed for the vast majority of people in the city. And I think that it's time that we not only try to intervene in the market to actually like restore sanity so that people can actually buy homes, and we're not just selling homes that are going to be turned around and rented out at ridiculous prices, but that we also as a city create a public option for housing. And that's I've talked to you about this before, but I'm a huge advocate for Vienna style social housing, and it's something that I've spoken at great length to city staff about, and they're interested in the model. And then, one of the things that comes up, of course, is, well, we don't have all of the resources in the United States and in Colorado that cities like Vienna have, especially when it comes to financing, because they actually have public financing options over there that we don't necessarily have here. So that's where public banking ties right into this push. And, I'm really excited to see AOC at the federal level and Rashida Tlaib both pushing a public banking act, and we're working very diligently here at the municipal and state level to get to make some headway on that topic as well. So,
Hell yeah.
Yeah, actually, we had a proposal for a business plan for a Bank of Aurora, basically, that was going to be brought to study session. I've been working on this for over a year with folks with the Rocky Mountain Public Banking Institute. And we were ready to basically bring the business proposal to council. And then we got some free, unfortunately late advice from someone who's actually a CU professor who's helping Massachusetts currently with their own public banking effort. And
Senator Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, it's not from Senator Warren, but it's actually a professor at CU. But yeah, I guess Massachusetts is looking at their own public bank, and he's been helping them with that effort. And he pointed out two hurdles in the Colorado statutes that need to be addressed,
This is
basically,
really
for
gross,
cities
sorry.
to move forward. What's that?
I'm just being really
the
gross.
frosting?
Mm-hmm.
No, it looks good.
Thank you.
Like, just cover the side. It's gonna look great, and it's gonna taste great, I'm sure too. That's a lemon cheesecake, right?
It is it's a lemon pound cake layered cheesecake.
Ooh, okay, that sounds awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I gotta catch it though.
yep. So basically,
Keep talking,
that's
keep
where,
talking.
yeah, all right. So the banking effort is, underway as well, but all of this stuff really, runs together when you're trying to, break from the status quo when you're looking at housing, when you're looking at public finance, when you're looking at how you finance necessary infrastructure and growth for a municipality as well. So it's all debt financed and so expensive over time. Like some of these bonds for like our water infrastructure, you're basically paying over 30 years twice the actual cost of the project. Half of it just goes to interest. So, it's really important when we're talking about housing and sustainability, both from an economic and from an environmental standpoint for a city. So, because oftentimes the private sector wants to build in ways that are harmful to the environment, and we need, I think, a set of public option for housing that demonstrates a more sustainable and equitable way to build. So,
would you recommend, like, you're familiar with the Earth homes, right? Earth ships?
I've seen the Earth ships. I think I watched your stream back when you were really into those for a while.
They're hilarious looking, but
Yes, they are.
they are obviously in no way, shape, or form going to pass any kind of like residential building code, like in any like city, right? Like that's like the one thing that's holding back Earth ships. It's like obviously no city is going to be like, yeah, no, actually we're going to allow you to build a home out of aluminum cans, like in the middle of like downtown Aurora, Colorado. Like even even the more progressive local governments like Aurora with people in positions of power like yourself, I think would probably take a step back and be like, I don't know about this, but what about modular housing? Using CLT, which is cross-laminated timber, to build sustainable housing. Right now, that's a big issue because the cost of lumber is so incredibly expensive. That's kind of somebody put that in the Discord that it's holding back some affordable housing projects right now from like beginning the stages of like development.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, actually, I spent this morning with an affordable housing developer touring a senior living facility that's also an affordable housing project in my ward, next to a part of town that's getting really nicely redeveloped, I think. That was like a deteriorated commercial strip center from like the 1960s or 70s. So definitely being put to much better use. But that's something that we talked about, that the projections for this project are 21% higher this year than they were last year because of the cost of timber. So, and that kind of segues back into banking as well, and speculation generally speaking in financial markets, because a large part of what's driving the uptick in the cost of building materials is just speculative behavior.
Exactly.
So some of it is supply, but a lot of it is speculation. So, always comes back to the same issues, I feel, no matter what we're talking about.
That's true.
But yeah, so Earth ships, I think, are not necessarily feasible, especially when we're talking about like really more dense urban areas that, or even suburban areas that are becoming urban just out of population growth and necessity. I don't really see those being necessarily cohesive with where I think we need to go from a sustainability standpoint when we're talking about land use. I think that they're really well suited though for like more rural parts of Colorado. So I would think like Bennett in places like not too far down I-70 from us here. That kind of stuff I think would be really interesting to see if they can make it work at the scale necessary for alternative housing solutions, or for folks who just don't want to live in urban environments anymore. And then modular homes. I'm again familiar with the concept, but I honestly don't know much about them. And my concern with a lot of the alternative kind of like building methods is not so much like compliance with current code, because that can always be changed as long as the projects or the design is safe and feasible. But it's just like how dense can you make it, basically? Because I think one of the big problems in suburban America is that everything is built around the concept of it's all built around automotive scale. A lot of our housing is single family. A lot of our commercial centers are single story with oceans of asphalt that contribute to the urban heat island effect, and also just waste space, generally speaking. So it's like, how do we get away from that kind of mindset and culture of development and towards something that is dense and sustainable, from again a land use and in Colorado especially a water use standpoint. That's one of our big problems. So
for sure, modular homes are manufactured usually in a like a manufacturing plant, and then delivered and constructed on site. So it's a feasible option for highly dense areas, especially if there is a semi-permanent foundation. Not like the foundation, but one of the newer like TED Talk style discussions about modular homes is you can make them semi-permanent in that you can literally pick them up and move them from one place to another, depending on the way that they are constructed in the first place, which is starting to be a little bit more of a valuable alternative, especially when you're talking about how obviously infrastructure and our built environment is permanent. Think about the permanent built environment of our suburban areas that don't allow for retrofitting of any kind of dense building, even if there was not a vested interest put into place by the NIMBYs to make changes or diversify the suburbs, right? But if there was no NIMBY standing in the way of integrating mixed use, multifamily housing into some of these R1 areas, then modular housing could be one of the ways that you could bring in housing that could ultimately be moved if need be. So
yeah,
let's say with the paradigm shift. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Saying like, if let's say with a paradigm shift, in 30, 40 years, there's a completely new way of living that we didn't even think of. Not, in the same way that, we're stuck with the suburbs because we didn't even consider that 50 years from now, nobody would want to fucking live here. So I guess that, but there's only so much you can do with land use, but it's just something to keep in mind. If there is some sort of major change in the way that we imagine housing or lifestyle that no longer fits with what is available in our built environments, then opting for constructing more semi-permanent spaces might be more beneficial for us down the line. I'm talking about us, like urban planners and things like that.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, having that flexibility is really important, right? Because that's part of the struggle, I think, that like a lot of suburbs, including Aurora, are facing, is that we have an environment that is built with permanence in mind, but is not really suitable to the population growth, the demographic shifts, and, of course, the elephant in the room, which is the speculative value of land and the impact that has on everything else.
Exactly.
So being able to just get up and move with that kind of, construction is a way to, I think, address speculation, right? Because the value of the land, I feel, would be harder to, not that it's concrete or anything even close to objective currently, but I think it'd be even harder to really peg value to specific tracts of land if things were mobile. You know what I mean? Because part of the value, I think, of land in a market comes from the amenities in the area. So not just like the quality of the soil itself or the foundation or anything like that.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be a way, maybe a little more roundabout to address that issue. But to your point, allows flexibility for the future for reuse, and also keeps up with just like lifestyle changes, technological advances. I don't know. Frankly, might make it easier for some places that are, in the process currently before our eyes being displaced by climate change.
Yeah.
Makes it easier for folks to just, pick up their stuff and go somewhere else. Because that's another, I think, big issue that we're going to be facing in the coming decades in the U.S.
So, have you started to talk about climate change resiliency plans or adaptation strategies for
Yes.
Aurora?
Yeah, that's actually a big part of the push that Council Members Murillo, Coombs, and I are working on this year. So I currently have staff researching parts of the International Green Construction Code to adopt for their 2021 code adoption. They're also just looking at the 2021 IGC or ICC, generally speaking, since this is a new issuance year for them. And Councilmember Coombs is pushing for the city to actually to really finish the resiliency plan for climate change. This is something that they actually began laying the foundation for, I want to say around 2010. But the work kind of stalled. I guess it was just not a priority for previous councils. So that changed with, the 2019 class of council members, and hopefully we'll be able to keep that in motion with the 2021 class of council members. But yeah, that's something that the city is looking into as well. And they admittedly, the goals that they adopted back in 2010 were very easy to meet, and frankly were met mostly because of a combination of federal regulatory changes that basically spurred industry adaptation to those changes, and not really anything the city did. So efficiency in vehicles, for example, and internal combustion engine vehicles, the expansion for solar credits and things like that are what made us meet those goals, especially with our public facilities. I think actually the city's done a really great job with our public facilities. We actually have free EV stations, charging stations, panels where we can stick them. And the city is actually leading the charge for getting rid of basically all turf. Thinking of Kentucky bluegrass, in Colorado, that those two things do not mix.
Yeah.
And moving towards native flora and xeric landscaping. So we actually have a whole garden, a public community garden that is just a demonstration of a bunch of different kind of xeric landscaping techniques and beautification ideas, basically, for our residents. And we also help people convert through our water utility, Aurora Water, their landscaping towards more environmentally friendly and resilient configurations. But that said, we need to do more, because when we went on our abridged water tour last year, so every year the city does a water tour where they bring council and then a certain number of residents through a lottery system basically along to tour different parts of the city's water infrastructure. And it's not just stuff here in the city itself. It's stuff that's way out in the mountains, like on the other side of the Continental Divide, even, because that's where most of our water comes from. And during that tour, we were told basically, hey, at the rate we're developing with our current water use, we have enough water in our system to support 9 or 10 more years, then 9 more years today at the rate we're going. Look at that cake.
It's pretty, huh?
Yeah, it looks tasty.
Yeah, you don't get to see it from the ugly side. You just get to see it from, like, the okay side. Yeah.
Well, it looks great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So...
Yep. Yeah, sorry. My wife is a really talented baker as well, so yeah. I'm picking up what you're putting down there. It's good stuff.
Does your wife do, like... I mean, I used to have, like, one of my best friends from in Albuquerque. She had her own bakery. And the shit that she would make... Sorry. The shit that she would make blew my mind. She was actually... Okay. There was, like, a show. I forget what it's called. It wasn't, like, a popular show. It wasn't on a major network or anything. But she was commissioned to bake a cake for this show for a gender reveal party. And, like, the baby looked exactly like a baby. It's like one of those, like, the cake is a lie type thing where, you know, you think you're looking at a sleeping baby and then all of a sudden, like, it's a fucking cake because you, like, cut into it and you see, like, the layers and shit.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, no. No. That's... Wow. I mean, that's impressive, but also kind of gruesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So...
Yeah, no, like, my wife doesn't... she actually has only ever taken one commission, and then she basically vowed to never do it again because it takes the fun out of it for her. So she's extremely talented, makes really impressive looking and absolutely delicious confections, but will not do it for money. So she just does it out of love.
I imagine that puts the pressure on, and it does take the fun or the enjoyment out, because then you are expected to meet, like, some sort of new standard that, you know, you obviously don't have to meet if you are just doing it for funsies, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So
that's just work in general. Yeah, but I don't know. I do all kinds of data analysis and on stream for funsies, but, you know, working on an actual piece that I've been commissioned to do, it is way different when you think about how you want to make sure you're not fucking up at every turn, you know?
Exactly. You become your own worst critic, and it's never good enough. Yeah. No, 100% with you.
So, going back to... So you got a lot going on with the... with this plan you're trying to put in motion. Oh, the question that I did have is... You were talking about a consolidation with 3 counties. My question would be, like, what would you expect the pushback to be like from Denver? Because Denver is a hot city. A lot of people kind of move there whenever weed was legalized, and, like, I bet you people are really who have ownership of some land in Denver would not opt to, you know, take away their investment, right? So how would you meet the needs of those homeowners or property owners in Denver who obviously are going to do everything in their power to push back because it's against their interests, their financial interests?
Yeah. So Denver, you know, we don't have any jurisdiction over Denver, and, you know, the same is true in the other direction. So thankfully, what Denver landlords think is really not our concern. And, like, historically, Aurora has been kind of the place where people who can't afford Denver go to. Because, like I said, like, you know, when I bought in Aurora, the median home price was like $325 to $350, like somewhere in that range, if memory serves. And at that same time in Denver, it was already like $450. So
Right. Yeah,
Denver
yeah.
now is like closer to like a $750,000 for like a bungalow from the 1950s, and Aurora is $500,000 now for like a 1970s, 1980s like single family home. So yeah, it's still more affordable by comparison, but in real terms, we're less affordable than Denver was when I first moved to Aurora, and that was just like I said, like 6 years ago now. So
So you think about like, okay, if we're seeing this major boom in the real estate economy, 6 years in the making, what is it going to look like in another 6 years? Like,
yeah,
and I think that is probably the best avenue to take when you're trying to get people to accept that, look, you're just like a temporarily embarrassed homeowner. You're never going to own a home. You're never going to
yeah,
afford to own a home. So you might as well try to find the best option or the best program that will alleviate the burden that will be inevitably placed on you if you are forced to rent from these corporate landlords that want to take as much from you as possible. They don't care how burdened you are. They want to extract your wealth, and it's in their best interest to do what they're currently doing and what they've been doing for quite some time, and that is continue to have control over the ownership market, cut as much supply from the ownership market as possible. That automatically raises the ceiling of how much it costs to enter the owner's market, which then benefits them in some way, especially because it's likely that they have some sort of stake on the owner's side too, right? Because during this period of reconstruction in the housing market, a lot of these private equity firms also went on a land purchasing spree. So if they have land tied to any housing development, whether new or existing, they're making money from investment on the owner's side. Then if they are purchasing those homes as soon as they are on the market, then that is the opportunity to make that conversion to a rental, which then is money that they'll be making in perpetuity from rent money. And so private equity firms like Blackstone and BlackRock, they're making money from all angles here, right? Which is why it blows my mind to think that in reality, any kind of vested interest or concerted effort to combat this predatory investment would be considered a taking, because it's protecting the incredibly vulnerable communities who are either going to be displaced from their own homes, they are going to be stuck in a perpetual state of rentership if these opportunity investors talk them into forking over their home or selling their home to these shell companies owned by BlackRock and Blackstone. That will be better for them before they have to default on their mortgages and head into foreclosure. That is what they're already doing right now. Somebody in the chat mentioned that they had a call with somebody and eventually they talked long enough to admit that they were a subsidiary of BlackRock. So it's happening right now. It's only going to get worse. And it's not in our interests as working class individuals to do nothing. You know?
right.
That's the whole thing. But what can you do? How can you fight back?
Yeah, I mean, I think the level that it makes the most sense to try to fight back on is the municipal level, right? Since we have the most influence over land use decisions, and that's really kind of what we're talking about here. Like, actually, it's not even influence; we have control over land use.
Yeah.
Like, so for anyone who's concerned about land speculation, these kinds of crises, and you're politically engaged, so your city council or county commission is where you need to be looking. To run or to support people to run. Those races are super important and are often the lowest key of all political races and don't get the coverage that they deserve. So, yeah, and I think you laid it out really well there, Amy, where, how is it that this can be argued that, well, trying to prevent land speculation and trying to prevent permanent capital from turning your entire, single family housing stock, if they had their way, into rental properties and creating basically a completely permanently indentured, rental society. How could that be considered a taking? And that's exactly what you laid out. They've already invested a lot of money into the strategy. They have people hired to execute on the strategy. They have people, they have land holdings that are currently farmland And you wouldn't know because they probably have it through like a shell company, or they pay someone to basically hold the land for them. However that works out in reality, and they're going to get their money one way or another.
Did you
So
read
how
my
do you?
op-ed by any chance, or my piece on CLTs?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, that's the reason why it's like really fresh in my mind, because I just wrote a piece about this and what Blackstone has been doing, and I kind of pitched this idea of trying to nationalize a CLT movement in this country, if that would be a feasible way to move forward to compete with Blackstone and the rest of these private equity firms that get all of these special sweetheart deals from the federal government. And it was just kind of like, I kind of like throwing Sketty at the wall, just like, hey, what if we tried to do this type of piece. And no, I kind of wanted to, if I could, get your thought on what would so is there a CLT in Aurora? Do you know?
Yes, I'll talk. Yeah, so this was
Talk
actually
about that. I gotta go get something.
Yeah, for sure. So back in 2017, before I ran myself and we got Crystal and 2 others elected, that's part of what 2 of them adopted onto their platform, was the creation of a CLT. So, 2 people, though, out of a council of 10 plus the mayor is not a majority. So the best they could do is get some interest for the community land trust model, in spite of a lot of skepticism and initial opposition. And they partnered with a local land trust. I hesitate to call them a community land trust because they're not actually owned by the residents. They're we'll call them a benevolent landlord kind of outfit. And that's the only group that's currently operating in Aurora. I had reached out to the Colorado Community Land Trust, which is actually a community land trust where the residents, communally own the land, but they didn't have the bandwidth, or I guess really that strong of an interest to come into Aurora back then. So part of the strategy that we have currently employed, and I'm hoping that we can get a, true majority of progressive/leftists on city council for the first time ever this November. But part of the strategy is to utilize the city to basically create a true community land trust, like a municipally run but community operated land trust.
Yes!
Community financed. So like this is actually part of local elections have consequences, and even without a majority, my good friend and colleague who's up for re-election, Crystal Murillo, she represents Ward 1, which is, I think we talked before, like Ward 1 in
I've
Aurora
talked to her
is
before.
the oldest part of the city. It's the most diverse and lowest income, and it's the part that is currently being gentrified as we speak. And part of her, push is to actually try to, basically put as much of, to build interest, to make as much of the housing up there as possible, as part of a trust, to shield it from gentrification, and to shield the people and businesses, because you can do this with businesses too, not just housing, from displacement. And our housing staff, they came up with they completed a housing study that Crystal basically got them to start back in 2018, and we adopted the housing strategy it was a very tight vote. It was just I think 6-4, and because part of their strategy includes land banking, and that means the city actually getting into the real estate business and buying up land for housing and for affordable commercial development as well, because when the city owns the land, you can effectively begin the process of decommodification that way.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the city's vested interest is to hold it so that whatever is built on it is affordable, and the land value is basically out of the equation. So, and I actually went to the International Making Cities Livable conference about a month and a half ago now in Carmel, Indiana, which is a red state, and Carmel is a red suburb, one of the wealthiest suburbs I think in the entire state of Indiana, if not the wealthiest, with a Republican mayor. And they've been doing what we're discussing here, using the city to buy land, to direct development the way the community wants it for 20 plus years now. So it's something that I think, depending on how you want to phrase it, could potentially actually get bipartisan support. But and frankly, Carmel's not using it for affordable housing.
Right.
They're
I
using
was
it
gonna say.
for to make a what I would kind of consider a Disneyland-esque suburb in terms of finishes and amenities. But we can use that same concept and actually gear it towards affordability and sustainability, and that would be my goal. So, and again, I think we actually have a lot of staff buy-in, which with our form of government is really important.
So, if in realistic terms, like, what would be that process if you were able to bring it to fruition? And would you mind if I eat a piece of cake?
No, please
Okay.
enjoy. I mean, enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Okay, so one more time.
All right. So, if we're gonna make this happen, step one is getting a majority on the Aurora City Council who actually cares about working people, thinks that housing is a right, elected. Because we currently, I can count to 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 if I'm, lucky on this issue right now. But we need 6 to make it happen. So, step one is winning elections this November. Step two is after we have that majority, making it clear to city management and staff that this is a council priority, and then having them basically execute on that. Look at that cake. And then having them execute on that plan. And that is going to take place through our budgeting process, where we would ask basically for staff to come up with a plan to purchase land, whether it's greenfield or already developed land, but the properties might be in distress, and allocate resources to fulfill their plan. Basically, we'll talk about allocating money to like our housing department so that they can actually begin the process of grabbing or buying real estate, so that they can ensure that these things are being put into trust and building the kind of housing that we need at the price point that we need at the scale that we need to address our community's needs. Because we have got, just from our renters, over half of the renters in Aurora, and this is with data that's like 3 years old at this point. They're going to be updating it this year or next year. But over half the renters in Aurora are cost burdened, and then I think it was like almost a third of all of our renters are severely, or of that group is severely cost burdened. So ends up with almost 20% of all the renters in Aurora are spending half of their income or more on housing. Half of them are spending over 30% of their income. And then when you figure that, I think it's like we have 43% of Aurorans are renters. Like, that's alarming. So, yeah, that means there's a ton of people in our city who are spending a lot of their money on housing that could be going to childcare, to better quality food, towards education, towards spending in our local economy, and helping our small businesses, especially our restaurants, thrive here in Aurora. Instead, that's just going to rent. So it's just being set on fire. And it's not a surprise to me that with the pandemic and the huge economic distress that was caused by a really, really not even half-assed, I'll say quarter-assed federal response to the issue, that we are seeing, like, nationwide, more homeless folks, more folks at risk of eviction, more folks getting evicted, even through the moratoriums, because landlords are clever and will just not renew leases because they're not obligated to. And not just that, seeing a oh my god, that looks good. Yeah, like, not just that, but we're also seeing like rises in crime, and that's all of these things to me run together. So it begins with how we're investing our public resources and how we control land. All of this inequity that stems from that problem creates all of these external problems that society basically pays for. So you could say in a roundabout way, we are subsidizing land speculation and property consolidation through everything from, homeless services and, public, the current like very meager public housing that we have, all the way through like, law enforcement basically. It's a disaster, and it's, I think, only going to get worse if we don't really, do something, not just at the local level, but also at the federal level to start turning this thing around. And yes, as someone said in chat, it starts with the money printer that the feds have that goes burr.
Uh-huh.
They could solve homelessness for $20 billion in the U.S., and they just want to approve $25 billion more for defense spending. Like, it's not a lack of resources or ability, it's a lack of political will.
Absolutely.
And yeah, like that goes all the way from City Hall to the halls of Congress. So, there. Hopefully, chat found the rant useful. So.
Oh, I'm sure they do, and they're used to rants, so that's pretty much all I give them. So what's staggering to me is going back to the money printer, and there is seemingly no shortage of money that is given to Wall Street and those who are kind of playing this huge role in speculation that is driving up the cost of housing, that is benefiting shareholders and investors who are putting, their own capital into these REITs and what have you. And in the event of the economy collapsing, they get money directly from the federal government to be able to keep business as usual. So, if there was a way to have that discussion, obviously it's not going to happen in the way that we want it to, from a top-down policy reconfiguration or through a nationalized banking industry that would no longer rely on the private sector, because that plays a huge role in our current market precarities tied to housing.
Absolutely.
Wall Street has the power and the authority to make all of these huge decisions in lieu of any regulatory policies that could be imposed at the top federal level. Instead, the government has outsourced the responsibilities onto the private banking sector to determine who gets loans for mortgages. And then with this proliferation of private equity firms taking over the rental housing market, they're also determining where we live as renters. If we can't afford to live where we live right now, then we're priced out. And that is so much power to give to Wall Street. I never understand how the prospect of communism or shifting to an economic system that more so resembles socialism is somehow scarier than what is happening right now, right? Where it's finance capital playing a huge role determining where we live. And
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. Go ahead.
Oh, all right. I was gonna say, like, I think part of it is just like capitalist realism, right? Like, I think Professor David Harvey has really done a great job talking about this. Like, it's very difficult for people to imagine an alternative when we are born into this system, we are educated in this system, we are taught capitalism good, capitalism freedom, and if you fail, it's your own damn fault. While the deck, so to speak, gets progressively stacked against working people, year by year by year, where we've reached a tipping point now, with our real estate market, for example, that like people, like the American dream, of the white picket fence in the suburban home is completely unattainable for the vast majority of working people. And, even folks who, played by the rules and did everything right and got their degree, they have student loans, they have medical debt, they can't afford a house. And then we wonder why, like, people are I'll try to keep it a little more tame. Like we have, an increase in deaths of despair. We have a generation, with Zoomers that are more depressed than ever, that are getting into like, frankly, some kind of interesting like ways to cope through like weird fantasies and things. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of alcoholism in our generation. And
Turn into Twitch.
I mean, yeah. The rise of Twitch, I think, is testament to. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean,
But,
are you wrong though?
I mean, I think Twitch is a really interesting outlet for a lot of this energy. You know what I mean? But no, like, but like I said before, I think Twitch is like our generation's version of talk radio. It's better because it's interactive.
Yeah.
But like, we're seeing all of this happen. We're seeing, like I said earlier, like crime increase nationwide, right? And this is, by the way, y'all are going to, so just be ready to like push back on this narrative, because y'all are going to hear about it in every city in the country, because this is what Chuds are saying is like, oh, it's just, we have all this crime now because of these Democrat-run cities, or in, our case, we're not a Democrat-run city. We've never had a Democratic majority in Aurora, but they're like, oh, because of these communists on city council and defunding the police. And even though like you're having crime issues everywhere, regardless of police funding, and homelessness issues too, regardless of any of that mess, it's the economics stupid. It's the inequity stupid. To paraphrase Bill Clinton, I guess. That's really what the crux of the issue is here, and we need to like be beating that drum every fucking day between now and we get these issues fixed. Because all of these things, like, yeah, some of the other folks here in chat are talking about global warming, inequity, aging, and all that stuff. How are we going to deal with this? We don't have the resources to really properly accommodate the society, or not the resources. We have the resources. We don't have the will to accommodate the society that we have today. We're not going to, I don't see that magically changing to accommodate like the needs of our society in 20 years. So yeah, kind
especially
of
tie that
like,
to automation and job displacement.
Yeah.
And so economic precarities are most likely to get way worse.
It is. I mean, like that's part of like what I'm having a hard time. Actually, I think it's that some of my Republican colleagues just frankly don't want to understand. But there are so many people already before the pandemic who were living on the edge, right? Like this is actually widely understood. Like they've actually coined the term precariat, right? To describe these people. And we're surprised that when there is a major economic, downturn because of a global pandemic, that, two things happen. One, that people don't have a safety net to fall back on. So crime increases. Like that's just duh. When economic circumstances deteriorate, crime typically increases. And two, that as crass and craven and callous of a society that we have, we just sacrifice people to the money machine. And now we have 600,000 plus, casualties to show for what? For an economy that is still like struggling to actually function, for more and more people living on the edge than they were even before the pandemic, for people who now have permanent, health issues because they contracted COVID, because they had to work. They were basically faced with no other choice but to continue earning a meager income to stay housed. And now they probably have medical bills on top of that they have to deal with. I mean, this is no way to run a civil society. So, yeah, I mean, we need to really reassess how we function. And I think, going back to, I think what started this little tangent of the conversation, was that really comes back to how our money supply is governed. And I encourage everyone who's listening, if y'all already haven't, pick up The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. She's someone who I've had a lot of admiration for going over a decade now, and that's her latest book about how our financial system actually works.
She's like the queen of MMA.
Of MMA.
MMA, not MMA, MMT.
Yeah.
I'm in a sugar coma. MMA, the queen of MMA is Joe Rogan.
True. But yeah, no, like she's amazing, and this is something that, I have a good relationship with our congressperson,
MMT.
but this is, I think, an area where it's difficult for folks, especially folks who've had like high levels of success in society as it's structured, to really understand. And this is how our money supply actually functions and how inflation actually functions. And it's not, based off of the raw supply of money. It's based off of commodity and availability, and and how much labor is actually out there, and a couple of other factors. And we can actually control how this all functions. This is something that, like, some of our biggest corporations like Amazon and Walmart understand very well. They're like masters of central planning. And we can actually apply that same philosophy to our monetary system and create a much more equitable society in short order. All we need is the will to do it, and the understanding. And that's the part that frustrates me the most. So until we find a way to vastly increase the squad's numbers, again, I'm gonna cite Professor Harvey when I think he was on Bad Faith is where I heard this, but his current goal and dream, and really like what gives him hope, is like a bunch of municipalities getting socialist majorities like we had back at the turn of the last century, and during the era of sewer socialism, but instead this time banding together to do what our federal government is failing to do. So you can do this through intergovernmental agreements and cooperation, to do things like public banking and really reimagine an economy that actually works for working people from the bottom up, if the top-down approach, which is the easiest approach, but unfortunately, from a implementation standpoint, but the hardest from a political will and electoral standpoint.
Exactly.
If that approach is more or less closed to us because of everything else. So the local level is where it needs to focus. And yes, I agree with Simp Daddy Kane. Nothing fundamentally will change until we get money out of politics. And unfortunately, to get money out of politics, you need people at the federal level to be willing to, I think at this point, pack the Supreme Court and overrule decisions like Citizens United that conflate money with speech, which is a farce in and of itself. But it's all these rules are that have been made by people with the coin. Well, what can you do? It's very difficult to change the system, and it's this way by intent. So
I feel like the gridlock that Republicans have over this entire process, they have used electoral politics and the three branches of government to create a series of the whole checks and balance of one branch over another has been completely bastardized by the Republican Party, as they found a way to consolidate power using each branch of government, knowing that with every 4-year election cycle, you roll the dice on the presidential outcome. But in terms of the decision to move forward and treat Supreme Court judges as prospects, using the same kind of financial institutions to get them at the head of the line for Supreme Court nominations during the time that a Republican president is in power, well, that's not an accident. And think about what the Republicans did whenever Merrick Garland was supposed to become a Supreme Court a member of the Supreme Court under the Obama administration. The Republicans had been working on this for so long. They were not about to allow an Obama appointee to ruin their plans. That is something that obviously has been in effect, and Republicans and conservatives have been working on behind closed doors for so long, that it's not an accident that all of these things kind of happened at once. Obviously, the Tea Party played a crucial role in the Republicans getting back the House and holding the Senate, and they did that under they expanded their powers under the Trump administration, I'm sure that a lot of the more stately gentlemen of the Republican Party would have preferred somebody else other than Trump, but they may do. And look what they did. Look at how they are power grabbing at every turn. And then they turn around and they project onto the Democrats anytime they execute a plan that is not in any way, shape, or form different than what they do, but it interferes with their grand plans. And they call it out and make it seem like this is all of a sudden some sort of outlier. The Democratic Party is behaving in a way that is completely unacceptable. No. Republicans literally have a plan of action and a strategy, and they have been keeping that shit in motion for a very long time. And anytime Democrats in some way either inadvertently or intentionally interfere, they act out and they try to gain public support by their Republican constituents to make it seem as though the Democrats are doing something wrong. So while the Democrats are failing their own constituents on their party because they refuse to push the needle any further left than what is considered the neoliberal norm under our hegemonic corporatocracy, they're also getting bullied by Republicans who are literally calling out anything that Democrats do as anti establishment or outside of the bounds of what is considered normal, and that is leading them to, act in a more civil way or move forward with Republicans and try to establish bipartisanship, and that's going to work for the Republicans, and that's going to benefit them and maintain their ultimate agenda. So we're fucked.
I mean,
sorry, but it kind of seems like we're fucked.
No, like